Good morning, my dear students. Today is the continuation of the second part of discussion on diuretics. Now, we'll focus initially on the cortical collecting tubule and the medullary collecting duct or medullary collecting tubule. So, we'll concentrate on this part. This gray zone is showing that this part is the mechanism of action for potassium sparing diuretics. Now, while discussing physiology, we know that unlike cells in the other segments, the principal cells which are present in the lid, this distal tubule and collecting ducts do not express any transporter for sodium or potassium in the apical membrane. So, just have a look at those two cell types. The principal cells is for transporter of sodium and water, and the intercalated cells, which is responsible for secretion of hydrogen and bicarbonate. They are basically blocking sodium movement, and it also prevents potassium movements out. Now, if you look at this pictorial presentation, you will be realizing that sodium enters these cells under its electrochemical gradients through specific amiloride sensitive renal epithelial sodium channels, and this entry excludes chlorine or any other anion, so that a 10 to 15 millivolt lumen negative electric potential is created. So, these will drive the passive paracellular chlorine diffusion into the interstitium, and therefore the potassium efflux from the principal cell takes place. So, the sodium absorption at this site is controlled to a large extent by aldosterone. Now, this aldosterone is basically a kind of substance which retains sodium and excretes potassium. Since this is the final site of salt reabsorption, it provides fine tuning to electrolyte excretion according to the need of the body. In common with other cells, the principal cells of distal tubule and the collecting duct, which are rich in potassium, a chemical gradient exists for its diffusion into tubular lumen, and this is aided by the lumen negative transepithelial potential difference at this site, and is therefore indirectly governed by the amount of sodium entering the cell. The luminal membrane of collecting duct intercalated cells possess an active secretory pump or hydrogen ion, which is again governed by the movement of sodium in the reverse direction. Any diuretic acting proximal to the aldosterone sensitive ion exchange site causes an increased delivery of sodium to the distal nephron, and there will be more exchange with potassium takes place. Thus, potassium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule and also at the ascending loop of Henle, thick ascending loop of Henle, but is secreted in the distal tubule and collecting duct. So, the net potassium loss is regulated by variations in the secretory process, and it is depending on the sodium load delivered in the distal segment, presence or absence of aldosterone, availability of hydrogen, as well as the intracellular potassium stores. The characteristic feature of this principal collecting duct cells is their responsiveness to antidiuretic hormone ADH. If ADH is absent, the hypotonic fluid entering collecting duct is passed as such, and the dilute urine is produced during water loading. If ADH levels are high, the collecting duct cells become fully permeable to water due to insertion of aquaporin 2 water channels in their apical membrane, and this will equilibrate with hyperosmotic medulla, so that concentrated urine is passed as occurs during water deprivation or hypertonic saline infusion. The collecting duct and the thin ascending loop of Henle are only segments permeable to urea. Antidiuretic hormone promotes insertion of urea transporter into the luminal membrane of collecting duct cells. The more urea is accumulated in the medullary interstitium, reinforcing the medullary hypertonicity during the water deprivation. And there is another term which you have to learn while going through the process of learning diuretics, that is free water clearance. This is defined as a volume of urine excreted per unit time in excess of that required to excrete the contained solute isoosmotically with plasma. It is positive when dilute urine is passed in the absence of antidiuretic hormone, and negative when concentrated urine is passed in the absence of antidiuretic hormone. So, if isotonic urine is passed, regardless of its volume, free water clearance is 0. Both positive and negative free water clearance are dependent on the production of a corticomedullary osmotic gradient and diuretics acting on the medullary thin ascending loop of Henle, and it depresses both. So, the potassium sparing diuretics have more downstream site of action, the collecting tubule. It reduces potassium loss by inhibiting sodium potassium exchange. They are not a very strong diuretic, rather they are low ceiling diuretic, as I mentioned in my initial video, the diuretic 1, where I have mentioned that, and because the action is further downstream, that is the reason behind this. And they often combined with thiazide, because thiazide diuretics will lead to potassium loss, then that can be counteracted by the potassium sparing diuretic. So, the potassium concentration remains unaltered. Decrease in potassium may lead to cardiac arrhythmia and sudden death. So, the combination of potassium sparing diuretic with thiazide is a crucial and beneficial drug interactions which can be seen in clinical practice. And beside this, there is another type of potassium sparing, potassium sparing diuretics can be of two types. One is already I mentioned the aldosterone antagonist, that is eplerenone and the spironolactone, and the other one is the renal epithelial sodium channel inhibitor, triamterene and amiloride. First, if we discuss triamterene and amiloride, these two are the non-steroidal organic bases with identical actions. Their most important effect is to decrease potassium excretion, particularly when it is high due to large potassium intake or use of a diuretic that enhances potassium loss. This is accompanied by a small increase in sodium excretion. The excess urinary sodium, it is matched by chlorine and variable amounts of bicarbonate. The urine is slightly alkalinized. The effect of urinary electrolyte pattern is superficially similar to spironolactone, which is another kind of potassium sparing diuretic, but their action is independent of aldosterone. Calcium and magnesium excretion is also reduced, but there is no effect on renal hemodynamics. How do they act? They actually, the luminal membrane of late distal tubule and collecting duct cells expresses a distinct renal epithelial or amiloride sensitive sodium channel through which sodium enters in the cell and down its electrochemical gradient, which is generated by sodium potassium ATPase system operating at the basolateral membrane. The sodium entry partially depolarizes the membrane, and therefore it is not accompanied, though it is not accompanied by chlorine and bicarbonate, creating a negative transepithelial potential difference around minus 15 millivolt, and which promotes secretion of potassium into the lumen through potassium channels. Basically, the term potassium sparing is a misnomer. Basically, they are retaining potassium in your body. So, they are increasing the concentration of potassium, though they are diuretics. The triamterene is incompletely absorbed. It has an active metabolite. The common adverse drug reactions are nausea, dizziness, muscle cramps, and all these things. Whereas amiloride is a very potent one, 10 times more potent than triamterene. It decreases calcium and magnesium excretion but increases urate excretion. And therefore, the hypercalcemic action of thiazide is usually augmented by hyperuricemic action, is partly nullified. And a mild antihypertensive action is also seen with amiloride. Usual side effects are again nausea, diarrhea, and headache. And amiloride blocks entry of lithium through sodium channels in the collecting duct cells, and therefore it mitigates diabetes insipidus induced by lithium. So, that is one of the effective drug in case of lithium induced diabetes insipidus. Usually the 1/4 of oral drug is absorbed and the T-half is around 20 hours. Whereas the main one which we are using regularly in the clinical practice is the spironolactone and the newer one eplerenone. Spironolactone is a weak diuretic. Its own right is most commonly combined with the other diuretics like thiazide, can be with furosemide. In edema, especially in cirrhotic edema, the cause is secondary hyperaldosteronism, and therefore it is the most useful drug in case of cirrhotic edema, as it prevents the action of the aldosterone produced in this case. It potentiates thiazides and loop diuretics and is frequently added to them in the treatment of ascites due to cirrhosis of liver. It breaks resistance to the thiazide and loop diuretic that develops due to secondary hyperaldosteronism and re-establishes the response. The spironolactone is particularly employed in refractory edema. In case of hypertension, spironolactone is used to augment the thiazide in the treatment of resistant hypertension. It also serves to prevent thiazide-induced hypokalemia. Further, it has the potential to attenuate hypertension-related renal fibrosis and maybe ventricular or vascular hypertrophy. So, it is a kind of drug which is preventing cardiac remodeling. In heart failure, it can be given as an additional drug to conventional therapy, and in primary aldosteronism like Crohn's disease, you can prescribe this drug. But this drug cannot be prescribed with ACE inhibitors, that we can discuss later, because the combination may lead to hyperkalemia, increase in potassium level, which ultimately lead to again cardiac arrhythmia. The adverse effects which we are seeing with spironolactone is basically the ataxia, mental confusion, drowsiness, epigastric distress, loose motions, mostly these kind of things. With the newer derivative, which is the eplerenone, having the similar kind of action, selective aldosterone antagonist, but they have a lower affinity towards the androgen and progesterone receptor, therefore much less likely to cause hormonal disturbances like gynecomastia, which can be seen with spironolactone, as well as impotence, menstrual irregularities are also lesser common. It can be absorbed orally, inactivated in liver by that CYP3A4 enzyme, which is a part of cytochrome P450 enzyme system, and it is indicated especially in moderate to severe heart failure, the post-infarction left ventricular dysfunction, and in hypertension. So, these are in brief about the potassium sparing diuretic. Now, from here onwards, we are coming to another one, which is basically not used as a diuretic in that sense. It is used basically in case of raised intracranial tension, and the drug is mannitol, which is a non-electrolyte of low molecular weight, that is pharmacologically inert like inulin, and can be given in large quantities sufficient to raise osmolarity of plasma and tubular fluid. Therefore, it is contraindicated in cardiac failure. It retains water isoosmotically in the proximal tubule. It has no interaction with the transport systems. It actively depends on the osmotic pressure exerted in the lumen. It blocks water reabsorption in, as I said, in the tubule, descending loop, also in the collecting loop. It expands extracellular fluid volume because it does not intercell, and it draws water from the intracellular compartment, and hence, as I said before, it is increasing GFR and inhibits renin release, and it may result in hypernatremia. So this drug is it increases renal blood flow, especially in the medulla, but the primary action of mannitol is to increase urinary volume and excretion of all cations like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and anions also like chlorine, bicarbonate, phosphate. These are going to be increased. So the urinary electrolyte pattern and natriuretic efficacy of different classes of diuretics is can be it can be seen with mannitol like drug. It is not absorbed orally, hence it is usually given via intravenous route as 10 or 20% solution. It increases in case of increased intracranial tension or even in intraocular tension in glaucoma. Acute congestive glaucoma is almost a drug of choice. By osmotic action, it encourages movement of water from brain parenchyma, CSF, also from the aqueous humor in case of intraocular tension. So for this purpose, you are using a sufficient dose of this mannitol, and it is infused over 1 hour. And this is usually a 20% solution. To maintain GFR and urine flow in impending acute renal failure, in shock, in severe trauma, cardiac surgery, in hemodynamic reactions, mannitol of around 500 to 1000 milliliter of 10 to 20% solution may be infused over 24 hours. Moreover, the prognosis benefits in conditions other than cardiac surgery are still unproven. So, if acute renal failure has already set in, the kidney is incapable of forming urine even after the osmotic load, and therefore the mannitol is contraindicated in this condition. To counteract the low osmolarity of plasma and extracellular fluid due to rapid hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis, as called dialysis disequilibrium, the mannitol along with large volume of saline was infused IV to produce forced diuresis in acute poisonings and in the hope of enhancing excretion of the poison. However, this has been found to be ineffective and to produce electrolyte imbalance, and it is not recommended right now. Mannitol is contraindicated in renal insufficiency and in acute tubular necrosis, in case of congestive heart failure, in pulmonary edema. It cannot be given. Contraindication means you cannot prescribe this in acute left ventricular failure. And the most common side effects are headache, nausea, and vomiting. Besides this, there are few drugs also available like glycerol and isosorbide, but those are not very commonly practiced. So these are the common uses of the potassium sparing diuretics. In case of liver failure, ideally it should be spironolactone because the secondary hyperaldosteronism is prevented. Congestive heart failure because it's preventing cardiac remodeling. In the osmotic agents are effective in case of post-trauma intracranial pressure, the reduced pre-surgical one, and in intraocular tension. It prompt removal of renal toxins, though nowadays been replaced by high-ceiling diuretics like furosemide. And one of the few diuretics, this osmotic agent like mannitol, that do not remove large amount of sodium, so that is one advantage, maybe a disadvantage. So it may lead to hypernatremia. So with that, I am concluding the second video on the diuretics.